Mike Tyson in a street fight is a very, very, very dangerous opponent. But this is just a nonsense argument. Just being allowed to do something doesn't mean that you can. That is how people that have no training in martial arts overestimate themselves. So many people think that they could literally take on a UFC fighter if they would just get angry enough. If you don't believe that, look up. There's a study being done on that like 6 or 7% of American adult male people think that they could literally take on an alligator, crocodile, an elephant in armed hand-to-hand combat and beat them. Or about the same percentage thinks that they could beat a lion, an adult lion, in hand-to-hand combat. It doesn't make any sense. And it's so tragic that like UFC now is over 30 years old, and in the very first UFC we put it to the test what happens when a boxer fights a grappler. We have seen what happens. The boxer boxes and the grappler grapples. And in over 90% of those cases the grappler wins. We don't have those cases anymore because now everybody knows, except people who have no clue about fighting, but everybody who's fighting knows that you have to train grappling to have any chance against a grappler. So now today nobody fights in any kind of MMA fight without having trained both. But back in that time there were people training only one martial art. So we had like heavyweight kickboxing world champions. They were allowed to grapple, yet they did not. Why did they not? Because they weren't trained in it. They weren't trained in it. There's a very good saying in the English language that when put to the test, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training. And that's very important. If you know anything about fighting, you know that a lot of it has to do with stress, has to do with flinch reaction, has to do with what you do when under stress. You're not calm in the situation and be like, oh yeah, I should probably do a double leg takedown, and then you just do a perfect double leg takedown, like even if you've never practiced it before. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. If you flinch a boxer, if you surprise them, wow, they're gonna do a boxing reaction. They're gonna bap, boop, and punch and do boxing stuff, obviously, because they're trained in that. And that is even more true for the higher levels. Because the higher level of training you have, the more ingrained those movements are into your mind, into your body. So there's absolutely near zero chance that a professional boxing world champion would display any kind of useful grappling in a street fight. He would obviously do the things that he's world class at. Why would he grapple? He would punch. He would try to grapple. He would try to punch, he would try to avoid grappling. And if you grab him, wrestle, then he would display the same untrained movements that all untrained people do. And many of us grapplers, we have been grappling boxers. We have the experience with boxing and kickboxing people who come to grappling. And I know I've experienced it hundreds of times, how boxers move when you grapple them. And many of those people who do martial arts, who are fighters, who are pro fighters, they always were a bit more on the more physical side, let's say. And they have experience in street fights too. And let me say, street fighters are not just the most overrated thing and the most easiest to win. It doesn't mean that they have any kind of useful, actual martial arts training. They're brutal, they're ruthless, they hit hard, they can take a shot, that's about it. But they're still as easy to take down as any other guy who has not had any wrestling training before. That's just plain old truth. And it's been proven time and time and time again in actual competition. We've had also world-class boxers coming to MMA fights without any prior training. We've had a Golden Glove champion in the very first UFC, where we had a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who has very limited wrestling. Royce Gracie is not a good wrestler at all. If you look at his takedowns, they look like a guy who trained 1 or 2 years. He's doing like that front kick and then a head first double leg, and that was enough to take down Golden Glove champion. We've seen Randy Couture, like manhandling, ragdolling. Who was it? James Toney. And the truth is, even if you don't like to face it, boxers are almost at the top of the fighting prowess level, but an MMA fighter is just still far above that level. It's just so much faster. It's just so much more dangerous. It's just so much more technical. An MMA fighter knows a lot more about fighting than any boxer ever will. Because boxing is limited to only hands, and even there, even in only the boxing, they're very limited in what is allowed. There's like not even back fists or hammer fists or inside or slaps. You know, like even in just what is fist fighting, boxing is way too limited. Let alone, have you ever fought somebody who doesn't know how to defend kicks? It's so easy to kick them, they literally don't see it. Have you ever tried to take some? I have. I have that experience. I'm a professional martial arts teacher and fighter since like 2006. And I've trained with so many and world class guys on all different kinds of martial arts. And so I have the real life experience in that. On top of that, everybody can just get onto YouTube right now and watch the first couple UFC fights and see what happens in real life, not in your fantasy, in real life, when an actual boxer fights an actual grappler. And they were allowed to grapple, and they did not display any kind of trained grappling. Why did they not? Because they weren't trained in it. And I know that still doesn't make sense to a lot of you, but at least I hope some people start to understand.